I remember, Paul, seeing a picture of what looked like the cylindrical object approaching the craft. But I don't remember seeing much more than that. Were there better pictures that we haven't seen out there somewhere?
I'm sure there are. That picture, I remember Marina Popovich, a famous Soviet personality. She was a test pilot and married to Pavel Popovich, a Soviet cosmonaut. We'll speak about them later. She gave me that picture back in 1991, and she said there are more pictures, and she also said that Globkosmos, Soviet Space Agency, knew from the very beginning, knew that the space probes were destroyed by alien force.
Amazing. What was it about the mission that would have them destroy these? Because some have gone through, some have been successful, some have not. Well, why these? Why did they take these out?
So-called LIDAR, I would say LIDAR technology. They were going to use a very interesting laser, not too powerful, but very unique, to take probes from the moonlet. The laser was strong enough to penetrate surface of the moonlet, and apparently whatever was on that moonlet, and still is, did not like it, knew what the Soviets had aboard, knew the content of their mission, and did not want us to get, let's say, our hands or mechanical tentacles. And I'll add that Professor Burdakov, top Soviet Russian scientist, who was, and we can speak about him more, always a proponent of the UFO research, and a brave person. He raised hell back in that time after the space mission failure, saying, what were we thinking about going there? Don't put ourselves in the place of an alien civilization. Would we want somebody to take space probes, test, our, let's say, our territory? And this was amazing. He was saying, what's going on? He wanted to find out more about that mission. And I don't think we today should be forgetting about, and we should ask more questions, because I think JPL has definitely more information than...
Yeah, no, you're right. It's just like the mainstream science media just let the thing die as they disappeared.
No, we should not. And JPL was in constant contact with the Soviets during that space mission. I mean, I've never seen a closer cooperation. It's like building that Tower of Babel.
And nobody knew what was going on. They couldn't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, the rover and the Opportunity, our Spirit and Opportunity, our rovers that are on Mars now, still functioning to some respect. Why were they allowed to succeed? Why were they allowed to land? Was because it was a mission where, the technology was just roaming around and looking at rocks and things like that? Or was there another reason?
I think that at whatever force is out there to prevent us from further research, I may know that there are special limitations on certain missions. For example, this alien intelligence, call it that, knew perfectly well what the Phobos probes were about to do, and it stopped them. Apparently, our current missions are not jeopardizing.
Well, do you believe that could be, again, one of the reasons why we have not gone back to the moon? I've always heard rumors that we were told by extraterrestrials, enough is enough. That's it.
They're quite. It's quite possible, but although I do know that there's great eagerness among the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese, who don't talk much but do a lot, to go back to the moon. And what's amazing is that if you look in history about the moon, in 1945, Stalin, of all the problems he had in his hands when they defeated Nazis, the Allies, and the Soviet Union, he talked about how the moon is to be split up between the Westerners and the Russians. In 1945 Potsdam Conference, that was, one of the biggest concerns he had in 1945 when his country was in ruins. And yet, this was a very interesting personality who was there was no nonsense in him. He was very practical. He wanted to get to the moon in 1945. And I think today, if you read information from Russia and the United States and China, you see another drive to get to the moon. It's like something is pushing us forward. And again, our planet has a lot of other problems we should solve, but there's that drive again.
Paul, I want to talk about the Russians and their sightings under and over seas and oceans. If we can talk about that in a minute when we come back. But first and foremost, does it also seem that the Russians / Soviets are more open in releasing and studying UFO information than we are here in this country? Because I also know that France is a little more open for disclosure. Brazil, we're not here in the United States.
Again, because of the size of the country and because of the inability to control all that information, and you can't control, because if you encounter an unusual object, constantly you encounter unusual objects over your nuclear power stations, over military outposts. Yep. You can't hide it.
You can't. Missile ranges everywhere.
Everywhere. And you cannot hide it. And in the state, the government wants to know, is this a threat? And obviously they had a few cases where they tried to shoot down UFOs, let's say, or do things that the UFOs would not like. They got burned. So they wanted to find out, is this going to stop where we stop firing at them? And the answer was obviously yes. Or are they so-called UFOs, USOs, are they going to go against us even if we don't do anything? So they needed to get that answer. And this information leaked out. And, we were lucky that during the perestroika period, when everything was in chaotic.
Yes, just collapsing.
Collapsing all around you, a lot of information was released, and you had top Russian military officers and generals coming out and speaking on television and in the media about UFOs, about gigantic discs over Moscow, 200 kilometers, in diameter. I mean, they came out, and we have names and dates in the book, who, when, and what they said.
Did they think they were ours, the United States?
No. In some, of course, they always
maybe in the beginning.
Sometimes in the beginning, but also they knew the capability of the American technology or the Chinese, and they knew that if it's a gigantic, submarine-like object going at incredible speeds, at the bottom of the ocean, they knew it wasn't anything the Americans would have. They always studied that probability, but also they came out. With the idea, no, it wasn't the Americans. And do you remember, the Soviets had an excellent counterintelligence agency, not even the KGB, the GRU. And they knew perfectly well what the Americans were doing. Take somebody like Hansen. They had spies like that, and also dedicated agents who would give them information about happenings in the United States.
All right, Paul, stay with us. Paul doesn't have a website, but his book, Mysterious Sky, Soviet UFO Phenomenon, that he co-wrote with Philip Mantle, is available at Amazon.com or your major bookstores. We'll be back in a moment as we continue this fascinating discussion with Paul Stonehill right here on Coast to Coast AM.